Hello, you're on the Scary Stories channel, and today I want to share with you an account that still sends chills down my spine even now, years after it happened. What you are about to hear is the true story of a man named Derek, who discovered something so disturbing in his apartment that it forever changed the way he understands the meaning of home. This is not fiction. This happened, and it could happen to you. My name is Derek, and I'm the one who experienced this nightmare firsthand. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in downtown Chicago on a cold November evening in 2019. It was a decent place for the price. Hardwood floors, high ceilings, located in a converted warehouse building from the early 1900s. The landlord, an older gentleman named Mr. Peterson, seemed normal enough. He gave me a tour of the place, showed me where the boiler was, explained the quirks of the heating system, and left me with a set of keys. Nothing about that day suggested what was coming. The first week was uneventful. I settled in, unpacked my boxes, and tried to establish a routine. I worked from home as a software developer, so I spent most of my days at my desk in the second bedroom that I'd converted into an office. The apartment seemed fine, quiet actually, which was surprising for a downtown location. Too quiet perhaps, but I wasn't complaining. I had everything I needed: a kitchen, a comfortable living room, and enough space to feel like I had my own world. It was on the 8th day that I first heard the sounds. I was sitting at my desk around 2 a.m., working on a project with a tight deadline. The building was silent except for the occasional sound of the city outside my window, the distant hum of traffic, the periodic siren of an ambulance passing by. That's when I heard it. A soft shuffling sound, like someone dragging their feet across the floor. It came from the other side of the wall, from what I assumed was my neighbor's apartment. I thought nothing of it. People have odd sleep schedules. Maybe my neighbor was getting a late-night snack from the kitchen. But then I heard it again, and again. Throughout the rest of that night, every 30 minutes or so, that same shuffling sound would occur. Not loud enough to be intentionally disruptive, but loud enough to notice if you were paying attention. By 4 a.m., I'd heard it at least 7 times. I told myself it was probably just the building settling, the pipes creaking, or the neighbor moving around. Old buildings make noise. That's just how it is. The next morning, curiosity got the better of me. I looked at the mailboxes in the lobby to see who lived in the apartment next to mine. According to the directory, apartment 4B was registered to a woman named Catherine Morris. I'd never seen her in the hallway, not once. In the week I'd been living there, I'd encountered 2 other neighbors on different occasions, a young couple who lived down the hall and an older man who lived on the first floor. But I'd never seen Catherine Morris. That evening, I found myself listening more carefully. The shuffling sounds started again around midnight, this time even more frequent. I heard it 5 times before 2 a.m. I began to wonder if Catherine ever slept, or if she was perhaps ill and needed help moving around. Maybe I should check on her, I thought. Be a good neighbor. But something stopped me. An instinct, perhaps. A feeling that something wasn't right about the whole situation. I didn't go next door that night. Over the next 2 weeks, the sounds became more frequent and more varied. It wasn't just the shuffling anymore. I heard what sounded like things being moved across the floor, furniture, or maybe boxes. I heard tapping sounds, like someone knocking on the walls. Sometimes I heard what might have been a voice, but it was muffled and indecipherable. It never sounded like talking, exactly. More like humming or muttering. And underneath it all, there was always that shuffling sound. My curiosity was evolving into genuine concern. I decided to try knocking on her door during the day. I wanted to check on Catherine, to make sure she was okay, to maybe ask about the noises in a friendly way. I stood in the hallway outside apartment 4B for several minutes, working up the nerve. Finally, I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. "Hello? Is anyone home?" I waited. Nothing. I put my ear against the door and listened. I could hear a faint sound from inside, that same kind of shuffling, but no response to my knocking. I tried again the next day and the day after that. I began to worry that something had actually happened to Catherine. Maybe she'd had a fall and couldn't get to the door. Maybe she was sick. I considered calling the landlord, but what would I even tell him? That I heard strange noises? That I'd knocked and no one answered? That wasn't exactly cause for concern. But the sounds continued every single night, and with them came my growing anxiety. One night, about 3 weeks after I first heard those sounds, something changed. I was in my living room, reading, when the noise started earlier than usual, around 10 p.m. But this time, it was different. This time, there was a pattern to it. Shuffling, pause. Shuffling, pause. Knock, 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 knock. Pause. Shuffling. It was almost like Morse code or a rhythm deliberately created. Someone was deliberately making noise in a pattern. I stood up and pressed my ear against the wall that separated my apartment from Catherine's. The sounds seemed to be coming from directly on the other side. I heard the shuffling again, rhythmic and purposeful, directly aligned with where I was standing. Could she know I was listening? Did she know I was there? "Hello?" I called out to the wall. "Is everything okay?" The shuffling stopped immediately. For the first time in 3 weeks, there was complete silence. Not the normal quiet of an empty apartment, but an active silence. The kind of silence that means someone is deliberately being quiet. Someone is listening to you listen to them. I backed away from the wall. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about what had just happened, about the way the sounds had stopped the moment I'd spoken. It was irrational, I know. It was probably just a coincidence, but it didn't feel like one. It felt like whatever was making those sounds was aware of me, and I had just announced my awareness of it. The next day, I did something I probably should have done weeks earlier. I called the landlord and asked about my neighbor. "Yeah, Catherine moved in about 3 months ago," Mr. Peterson told me. "Quiet lady, keeps to herself." "Why, is there a problem?" No problem," I lied. "I just wanted to introduce myself. I've knocked on her door a few times, but she's never answered." "She doesn't answer the door," Mr. Peterson said matter-of-factly. "I told you during your tour, this building has some long-term residents who are very private. Catherine is one of them. As long as the rent is paid, that's all I care about." "The rent is paid?" I asked. "She pays on time. Automatically transferred from her bank account every month, like clockwork. Why are you asking so many questions about her?" "Just curious," I said, though my heart was racing. "Thanks, Mr. Peterson." After I hung up, I realized something that made my skin crawl. If Catherine's rent was paid by automatic transfer, that meant she had set it up at some point. She had a bank account. She was a real person, but I had never seen her. Not once. And the sounds suggested someone was home at all hours of the night. That evening, I did something stupid. I went online and tried to find information about Catherine Morris in Chicago. There were thousands of results, of course, all of them useless. Catherine Morris is a common name. I tried adding the address, the apartment number, different variations. Nothing useful came up. I was spiraling now, I knew that. But I couldn't stop myself from wondering, who was this woman? What was she doing in that apartment? Why did she never leave? How was it possible that I'd never encountered her in the hallway, the lobby, or anywhere else in the building? The sounds that night were worse than ever. They started at 8 p.m. and didn't stop. Shuffling, tapping, dragging, more shuffling. And underneath it all, I began to notice something else. Breathing. Heavy breathing, though I couldn't see how I could possibly hear that through the wall. But I swear, on everything I hold dear, that I heard it. Deep, rhythmic breathing, as if someone was pressing themselves against the other side of the wall, right where I was standing, breathing heavily. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my living room with all the lights on, occasionally pressing my ear to the wall, listening to those sounds that made my skin crawl. The breathing continued throughout the night. It never changed, never stopped. Just that constant, heavy inhalation and exhalation. By the morning, I had made a decision. I was going to find out what was going on, one way or another. I couldn't live like this anymore. I couldn't spend my nights listening to a stranger in the adjacent apartment, making these sounds, knowing she was watching me through the walls, listening to me listen to her. I went to the landlord's office in the building. Mr. Peterson was in a foul mood when I arrived. "What now?" he asked, not looking up from his newspaper. "I need to ask you something," I said. "Can you tell me when Catherine moved into 4B? He sighed. "I already told you, 3 months ago." "I need the exact date, and I need to know if you have any background information about her. References, previous addresses, anything like that." Mr. Peterson looked at me over his glasses. "Why are you so interested in this woman? This is getting creepy, kid. Are you harassing her?" "No, of course not. I'm concerned about her. I haven't seen her leave the apartment since I moved in. Not once." For the first time, Mr. Peterson seemed to pause. He set down his newspaper and looked at me properly. "She hasn't left the apartment?" "Not that I've seen, and there are strange sounds coming from her place at all hours." Mr. Peterson was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up. "Come with me." We went to his office, and he pulled out the rental file for apartment 4B. Catherine Morris, age 32, employment listed as freelance consultant, previous address in Milwaukee. The application had been approved quickly, and she'd paid the first 3 months' rent up front in cash. Beyond that, there was very little information. "This is all we have," Mr. Peterson said, looking troubled. She was a quiet application, straightforward. Paid in cash, which is unusual but not unheard of. I did a basic background check. Nothing came up, no red flags. Why would I worry about her not leaving the apartment? That's her business. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "When you did the walkthrough with her, did anything seem off?" Mr. Peterson frowned. "I didn't do a walkthrough. She asked to take the keys, and I handed them to her. She said she'd been in apartments like this before and didn't need the tour. Different from you." A chill ran through me. Different from me. She hadn't even looked at the apartment. She just took the keys and left. That night, the sounds were even louder. I sat in the dark, listening. Shuffling, tapping, dragging, and that breathing. That constant, heavy breathing. And then, something new. A voice. Muffled and indistinct, but definitely a voice. And it was saying something. Over and over. The same phrase, or maybe the same word. I couldn't make it out, but it sounded like it was directed at me. Like it was meant for me to hear. I couldn't take it anymore. I got up, grabbed my phone, and called the police. "Chicago Police Department. What's your emergency?" the dispatcher asked. "I need someone to check on my neighbor," I said, my voice shaking. "I think something might be wrong with her. She hasn't left her apartment in 3 weeks, and there are strange sounds coming from there at all hours. Have you witnessed any violence or heard screams for help?" the dispatcher asked. "No, but has she violated any noise ordinances that have bothered you personally?" "Yes, actually. The noise is constant. It's affecting my..." "What is the nature of the noise? Is it music, people arguing, something else?" I hesitated. How could I explain that it was footsteps and breathing and sounds that didn't have a clear source? "It's hard to describe. It sounds like she's moving around constantly. I haven't seen her leave in weeks, and I'm worried about her welfare." The dispatcher put me on hold and then came back on the line. "Sir, we have a lot of calls in this city. We can send someone by if it's an emergency, but from what you've told me, it doesn't sound like an emergency. It sounds like you have a neighbor who's making noise. Have you tried talking to her?" "I've knocked on her door multiple times. She won't answer." "Then I suggest you speak with your landlord about breaking the lease or requesting a room change. Without evidence of an actual crime or emergency, there's not much we can do." And they hung up. I sat in the dark, phone in hand, feeling completely alone. The sounds continued throughout that night. They seemed to get louder, more aggressive. The shuffling became frantic. The tapping became harder. And underneath it all, that breathing, getting heavier and more labored, as if someone was getting closer and closer to the wall. Around 3 a.m., I heard something that made my blood run cold. A thud. Not a soft sound, but a hard impact against the wall between our apartments, right at the point where I had been pressing my ear. If I had still been standing there, the impact would have hit me directly. I grabbed my keys, put on my shoes, and left the apartment. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there anymore. I drove around the city until dawn, trying to think rationally about what was happening. By the time the sun came up, I had convinced myself that I was overreacting. People made noise. Neighbors were weird. The police wouldn't come because there was no actual emergency. Maybe Catherine was just eccentric. Maybe she was on a completely different sleep schedule from me. Maybe I was just being a paranoid idiot. I went back to the apartment and tried to resume my normal life. But the sounds didn't stop. If anything, they became more active after that night. The thumping against the wall became a regular occurrence. Sometimes it would happen in the middle of the day when I was working at my desk. Sometimes it would wake me at 3 or 4 in the morning. 2 weeks later, I made the decision to move out. I couldn't take it anymore. The anxiety was affecting my work, my sleep, my mental health. I couldn't afford to stay in a place that terrified me every single night. I gave notice to the landlord and started looking for a new apartment. But before I could move, something happened that changed everything. It was a Friday morning, and I was packing up my belongings. I was in my bedroom, putting clothes into boxes, when I heard a sound that stopped me in my tracks. A key turning in a lock. I froze. That lock was the front door. Someone was opening my front door. I stood still, listening. The door opened fully, and I heard footsteps in my living room. Slow, measured footsteps. Someone was in my apartment. My heart was pounding so hard, I could barely hear anything else. I quietly closed my bedroom door and locked it. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, but I didn't press the call button yet. The footsteps continued through my living room, toward the hallway, toward my bedroom. I heard my bathroom door open, then close. Then my bedroom door handle rattled slightly, testing to see if it was locked. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice hoarse. The handle went still. "Who's in my apartment?" I shouted louder. For a long moment, there was no response. Then, slowly, the footsteps moved away, back toward the living room, toward the front door. I heard the door open. I heard a sound I had come to recognize over the past month. That shuffling sound, the one that belonged to Catherine Morris. The door closed. I immediately called 911 and reported that someone had broken into my apartment. I left my locked bedroom and went to check if anything was obviously missing. As far as I could tell, nothing had been taken. The only evidence of the break-in was the fact that my front door was now unlocked. When I had locked it before going to bed, the police arrived about 40 minutes later, 2 uniformed officers who seemed skeptical of my story. They checked the lock and found no signs of forced entry. They asked me if I was sure the door had been locked. I told them I was sure. They asked me if I recognized the person who had entered. I told them I hadn't seen them, only heard them. One of the officers asked, "Is it possible that someone who lives in the building used a key? A maintenance person? The landlord? Someone like that?" And that's when it hit me. Catherine Morris. She was the only other person in the building who might have had a key. But how would she have a key to my apartment? "The landlord," I said. "Where is Mr. Peterson's office?" The officers exchanged a look. "Sir, are you saying you think the landlord broke in?" "No, I'm saying—" I trailed off. I didn't know what I was saying. I just knew that Catherine Morris had somehow gotten into my apartment. The police did a basic investigation, found nothing of value missing, and told me that if I wanted to file a report for breaking and entering, I would need to come down to the station. One of the officers suggested that maybe someone had a spare key from the previous tenant. After they left, I called Mr. Peterson immediately. "I need a new lock on my door," I said. "What happened?" he asked. "Someone got into my apartment this morning. Someone from the building, I think. Someone named Catherine Morris." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "The tenant in 4B?" he finally asked. "Yes. I think she has a key to my apartment. Can you change the lock?" "I don't see how she would have a key to your apartment. Each tenant gets one set of keys and just change the lock," I said, and I hung up. Mr. Peterson did change the lock. He came by that afternoon with a locksmith, and within an hour, I had a new deadbolt. But the sense of violation didn't go away. Catherine Morris had been in my apartment. She had walked through my space, opened my doors, tested my bedroom lock. The thought made my skin crawl. That night, the sounds were different. There was a quality of anger to them now. The shuffling was faster. The tapping was harder. The breathing was louder. It sounded like Catherine was furious about something. And then, around 2 a.m., I heard her voice again. This time, it was louder, and I could make out a few words. "Why, you... listening?" And then a sound that might have been crying, or might have been some kind of wail. I realized something in that moment. Catherine wasn't trying to scare me. At least, I didn't think that was the primary intention. Catherine was in pain. Catherine was suffering. And I had been hearing the sounds of her suffering for over a month. The realization didn't make me feel better. If anything, it made everything worse. Because now I wasn't just dealing with an aggressive, threatening neighbor. I was dealing with someone who was clearly unwell, and I had no idea what to do about it. The next morning, I called Mr. Peterson again. "I need to know everything you know about Catherine Morris," I said. "I don't know anything beyond what I told you before," he said. "There has to be someone I can call. A number, an emergency contact, something." The lease only has the contact information she provided, a phone number and an email address. "What's the number?" I asked. Mr. Peterson gave it to me. I called it immediately. A woman answered, but not the voice I had come to associate with the shuffling and breathing. This woman sounded older, tired. "Hello," she said. "Hi, I'm trying to reach Catherine Morris," I said. "This is Catherine's mother. Who is calling?" My heart sank. "This is Derek Hayes. I live next door to your daughter, in her apartment building in Chicago." There was a pause. "Is Catherine okay? Has something happened?" I didn't know how to answer that. I've been hearing sounds coming from her apartment. I haven't seen her leave in over a month. I'm concerned about her." Catherine's mother was quiet for a long moment. "What kind of sounds?" "Footsteps, shuffling, dragging, things moving around. It's constant, all hours of the day and night. And I think she may have gotten into my apartment at some point. I just want to make sure she's okay." "Did Catherine tell you why she moved to Chicago?" her mother asked. "No, I've never actually met her. I've never seen her." Catherine's mother let out a long sigh. "She moved there because she wanted to get away from her old life. She had some mental health issues, and she was trying to start fresh. She said she found an apartment and a new therapist, and she was going to focus on getting better." "When was the last time you spoke to her?" I asked. "A few weeks ago, maybe 4 weeks. She said everything was fine. She said she was taking her medication, and things were improving." Everything went cold inside me. "And you haven't heard from her since?" "No, but she's not good at staying in touch. I call sometimes, but she doesn't always answer. I assumed she was busy or her phone was off." My hands were shaking. "I think something is very wrong. I think something has happened to her." Catherine's mother asked for the landlord's contact information, and we hung up. I immediately called Mr. Peterson again and told him that he needed to open up apartment 4B and check on Catherine. I told him everything Catherine's mother had told me about her mental health issues, about the fact that they hadn't heard from her in weeks, about everything. For the first time, Mr. Peterson seemed to take me seriously. "Stay in your apartment," he said. "I'm calling the police." The police arrived about an hour later, and this time they came with a warrant. They opened apartment 4B, and from my apartment, I could hear them moving around in Catherine's space. I pressed my ear against the wall one last time, listening to the sounds of the police doing their work, listening to them discover whatever it was I had been hearing all this time. It took them about 10 minutes. Then I heard one of the officers call out to another, and their voices took on a different tone. Urgent. Serious. The officer came to my apartment and knocked on the door. I opened it, and his face told me everything I needed to know before he even spoke. "Is there someone you can stay with?" he asked. I went to stay with a friend that night. From her apartment, I called Catherine's mother and told her what I knew, which was very little. The police hadn't told me anything specific. All they said was that they would be conducting an investigation and that they would be in touch if they needed a statement from me. The next day, the news came out. Catherine Morris had been found in her apartment. She had been dead for approximately 3 to 4 weeks. The official cause of death was determined to be a combination of medications taken with alcohol, though the police noted that the circumstances were unusual. She had been found in a state of advanced decomposition, and the state of her apartment suggested that she had been experiencing severe psychological distress in the weeks before her death. The sounds I had been hearing were Catherine in the final stages of a mental health crisis. The shuffling was her pacing, her restless movements. The breathing was her, struggling, suffering. The words I couldn't quite make out were her voice, crying out in pain or confusion, and the thumping against the wall, the sound that had terrified me so much, was Catherine falling, struggling, or some final act of desperation. The sounds I had heard were the sounds of a human being in the deepest, darkest place imaginable, and I had been listening to it all on the other side of the wall, terrified and completely helpless to do anything about it. The police investigated me briefly, asking why I hadn't reported my concerns earlier, why I hadn't contacted her family, why I had let it go for so long. I had answers, but none of them felt adequate. I was scared. I was creeped out. I wanted it to go away. Those are the honest answers, and they haunt me every single day. Catherine's mother sued the landlord for inadequate welfare checks. The case was settled out of court. Mr. Peterson eventually sold the building and disappeared from Chicago entirely. And I moved into a new apartment in a different part of the city and tried to put the whole thing behind me. But I can never fully put it behind me, because I learned something from that experience that I can never unlearn. In a city of millions of people, surrounded by neighbors on all sides, you can still be completely, utterly alone. You can live in an apartment, pay your rent, exist in the world, and nobody will know that you're dying. Nobody will check on you. The sounds you make in your suffering will only terrify the people who hear them, and even that terror won't be enough to make them act. That's the real horror. Not Catherine as some malevolent force haunting my apartment from the other side of the wall. The real horror is Catherine as a human being, isolated and struggling, and the fact that the only thing separating her from being discovered sooner was my own fear and the indifference of the people around her. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear those sounds. I know it's impossible. I know I've moved, that the building is miles away, that Catherine is long dead, but I hear them anyway. The shuffling, the breathing, the endless, desperate sound of a human being in complete psychological pain. And I wonder if, somewhere in this city, someone else is hearing similar sounds, wondering what they are, being terrified of them, not realizing that what they're hearing is a person screaming silently for help. This is Derek, and this has been my story. What you chose to do with it is up to you. But I hope that if you ever hear strange sounds coming from a neighbor's apartment, if you ever get that feeling that something isn't right, you don't do what I did. You don't ignore it. You don't let fear paralyze you. You call for help. You reach out. You try, even if it seems futile, because the alternative is a tragedy that could have been prevented. Thank you for listening. If you have your own stories to share, or if you want to help someone who might be suffering in silence, please reach out. Because we're never really alone, even when we think we are. And sometimes, what we think is haunting us is just another person crying for help from the other side of the wall.